Hello everybody, we're going to hit you up with another presidential election. This one, the election of 1872. Ulysses S. Grant going to go for the second term. Can he get it done? Let's find that out right now. Excuse me, as always, we're going to start off with the incumbent party, and that is the Republican Party. The incumbent president is Ulysses S. Grant. He's easily going to win renomination for president. Remember, he is from Illinois. But his incumbent vice president, Skylar Colfax, come to find out that he was implicated in a credit mobilier scandal in which some politicians accepted bribes from the railroad company Union Pacific. So, as a result of this, Colfax is taken off the ticket. And instead, Grant's going to bring along for the ride Henry Wilson, a senator from Massachusetts, as his running mate. But other Republicans aren't too happy that Grant had been renominated for president. So as a result, they bolt from the convention wary of the corruption of the Grant administration, and they form the Liberal Republican Party, which we'll talk about right now. Now, the Liberal Republicans are formed from an influential group of dissident Republicans that bolted from the Republican National Convention in 1872 because they were tired of the corruption of the Grant administration, and they're going to nominate Horace Greeley of New York as their presidential candidate. Greeley had been a congressman from New York back in the 1840s, but he was more known as the editor of the New York Tribune. He's going to bring along for the ride the governor of Missouri, Benjamin Gratz Brown, as his running mates. Now that we have our Republican ticket, now that we have our Liberal Republican ticket, let's take a look at the Democrats. Now, the Democratic National Convention is going to meet over 2 days in Baltimore on the 9th and 10th of July, 1872, and they strongly desire to defeat Grant. So, as a result of this, they also endorse the Liberal Republican ticket of Horace Greeley and Benjamin Gratz Brown, and they nominate those guys for president and vice president respectively. So Horace Greeley is going to run on a fusionist ticket with the Liberal Republicans and the Democrats. As a result, the Democrats also accepted the Liberal Republican platform, which meant they rejected the anti-Reconstruction platform that they put out in 1868, the last election. They realized that to win the election, they had to look forward, not try to refight the Civil War. Also, they realized they would only split the anti-Grant vote if they nominated a candidate other than Greeley. However, Greeley's long reputation as the most aggressive antagonist of the Democratic Party, its principles, its leadership, and its activists cooled Democrats' enthusiasm for the nominee, and there was a sizable minority led by James A. Bayard that sought to act independently of the Liberal Republican ticket. The 1872 Democratic National Convention is the shortest convention in American political history. Now that we have our Republican ticket and that we have our fusionist ticket, let's get right to the campaign. Now, Grant's administration and his radical Republican supporters have been widely accused of corruption, and as a result of this, the Liberal Republicans, they demanded civil service reform, meaning government appointees were made by merit instead of political affiliation, and they also wanted to end Reconstruction, including withdrawing federal troops from the defeated South. Both liberal Republicans and Democrats, though, were disappointed in Horace Greeley, as was asked, why turn out a knave just to replace him with a fool? Greeley was a poor campaigner with little political experience, and also his career as a newspaper editor gave his opponents a long history of eccentric public positions to attack. Now, with memories of his victories in the Civil War to run on, at this point, the Civil War had been over for nearly 10 years. So, the memories of the Civil War is still fresh in the minds of many Americans, and so are Grant's victories in that war. So, as a result of this, Grant was unassailable. Grant also had a large campaign budget to work with. One historian was quoted as saying, "Never before was a candidate placed under such great obligation to men of wealth as was Grant." And a large portion of his campaign came from entrepreneurs such as Jay Cooke, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Alexander Turney Stewart, Henry Hilton, and John Astor. Now, also women's suffrage came to be an issue in this election as well. This was the first election after the formation of the National Women's Suffrage Association and the American Women's Suffrage Association in 1869. So as a result of this, protests for women's suffrage became more prevalent. The National Women's Suffrage Association held its annual convention in New York City on the 9th of May, 1872. Some of the delegates supported Victoria Woodhull, who had spent the years since the previous NWSA annual meeting touring the New York City environs and giving speeches on why women should be allowed to vote. At this point, unless you were in Wyoming territory, I believe, women didn't have the right to vote. Women did not get the right to vote nationally until the 19th Amendment was passed and put into the Constitution. But anyway, the delegates selected Victoria Woodhull to run for president and named Frederick Douglass for vice president. So a woman running for president and an African American running as vice president. Now Douglass, he didn't even attend the convention. And he never acknowledged the nomination, although he would serve as an elector when it came time to cast the ballots in the Electoral College. Now, Woodhull gave a series of speeches around New York City during the campaign, but her finances were very thin. She had to borrow money from her supporters, and she was often unable to pay them back. On the day before the election, Woodhull was arrested for publishing an obscene newspaper, and so was unable to cast a vote for herself. But Woodhull would not have been able to take her oath of office anyway, because she would not have reached the constitutionally prescribed minimum age of 35 until September 23rd, 1873. Now, historians have debated whether to consider her activities a true election campaign. And also during this election, Susan B. Anthony would be arrested and fined $100 for attempting to vote, and also other suffragettes would attempt to vote in this election. But remember, it was not until the 19th Amendment was passed that women received the right to vote. But before the 19th Amendment, women did have the right to vote. You would just have to go out west to have that right. Now that we have our campaign in, let's get to the results. Now, before we get into the numbers here, I'm going to show you the electoral map. And, you see all these weird names and all that stuff on here. And that's because on November 29th, 1872, Horace Greeley died. He died after the popular vote was counted, but died before the Electoral College can meet and count their ballots. So the 66 electoral votes that he would have had could not go to him because, for obvious reasons, he wasn't alive anymore. So these electoral votes went to 4 different presidential candidates and went to 8 different vice presidential candidates. Horace Greeley still remains the only candidate in presidential election history to die during the election process. Now, let's just pretend that Horace Greeley is alive, that he survived through this whole election. He would have lost the election anyway. Ulysses Grant is reelected, 286 electoral votes to only 66 for Horace Greeley. In terms of the popular vote, Grant's going to win 55.6% of the popular vote, while Greeley's going to win 43.8% of the popular vote. The electoral votes of Arkansas and Louisiana were rejected due to irregularities, but both of those states voted for Grant. Overall, 31 states went for Grant. 6 states went for Horace Greeley in the fusionist ticket. Now, there are going to be disputes about this election, but not as cray-cray as the next election is going to be, 1876. That election we'll talk about next time. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this election video. I hope you get a lot out of this video. If you haven't seen any of my previous videos, go ahead and watch those if you want. And if you want, we'll see you next time.